And today we have with us Chuck Burr. He is a Nebraska Extension Educator located at the West Central Research and Extension Center in North Platte. He's been an Extension Educator in Nebraska since 1990. His extension focuses on areas including water quality, limited water irrigation management, and cropping systems. Chuck received his Bachelor's in Science and Master's in Science from UNL in mechanical agriculture. He was raised on a grain and livestock farm in Otoe County, Nebraska. So I'll let you go ahead and take it away, Chuck, and tell us about water quality.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Alicia. I appreciate the invitation to speak with you today. Just want to mention that I don't consider myself an expert in water quality. I do have a lot of experience in water quality, but we have a couple state agencies that spend, all of their time just looking at water quality, and we'll point to some of the data that they've collected over the years. Also, for the participants, if you could just put in the chat box where you're from. Will give me an idea of how to kind of tailor my talk, I guess, to specific parts of the state. As Alicia mentioned, I am in Lincoln County here in North Platte, Nebraska. I grew up in southeast Nebraska in Otoe County. Syracuse is where I went to high school a number of years ago. So I've worked in this area of water quality for over 30 years now. I started my career in Northwest Missouri at St. Joseph, and I was there about 4 years and then moved to South Central and in here, West Central Nebraska, for the remaining 25, 30 years. So really the agencies that have responsibility for water quality in Nebraska is the Department of Environment and Energy. This agency a year ago was known as Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality. So they changed their name, joined up with the Nebraska Department of Energy, and so now it's the Nebraska Department of Energy and Environment and Energy. So you've got people from Lincoln, Morris Bluff, Raymond, York, North Platte. Great. So glad to see all the participants along with us today. So we do have local agencies that also have responsibilities in terms of water quality. Out here at North Platte, our local natural resources district would be the Twin Platte NRD based here in North Platte. And so they kind of work with our state agencies to monitor and try to improve water quality, maintain water quality across the state. Also in the chat box, if you have questions as I'm going through this talk here today, don't be afraid to go ahead and type in your question. I just soon answer questions as we go through while we're on a specific topic, then maybe try to come back to that later in the hour here. So water quality for private well owners, most of you are probably on a city's utilities water supply, but anybody that would be like live out in the country or some of our small communities might have private well owners. So you would have your own well, and it's really your responsibility to monitor the water quality to make sure that it's not contaminated, too contaminated to drink, I should say. And the two main issues that I hear of in private well owners is nitrogen, nitrates in the drinking water, and then E. coli bacteria. We'll talk about nitrates a little bit more here in a minute. The E. coli, that really comes from our digestive system or like animals' digestive system. So it's a natural bacteria in our gut, and we can get that entering into our drinking water in some cases. Not very often in well owners unless there's been a flooding event or maybe replacing a pump within a well or opening up the system, allow bacteria to get in. Most of the time that's not an issue, but we do recommend our private well owners to monitor their water, test it once every year, and would go to the Nebraska Department of Health to be able to get that test completed. So water quality for cities is pretty much taken care of by the city itself. They are required to test their water 4 times a year. So they do tests not only for nitrogen and E. coli bacteria, but other potential contaminants as well. So if you live within a municipality, you can be rest assured your water quality is being monitored and taken care of in terms of drinking water. So we're going to talk a little more about groundwater quality here next, and then follow up on some surface water quality issues that we see across the state. So this is a map showing nitrate and nitrogen concentrations. So yeah, I'm not sure you can read the legend here, but the green dots represent nitrate levels from 0 to 7.5 milligrams per liter. Parts per million would be the same units there. The yellow ones, 7.5 to 10 milligrams per liter. Darker yellow or almost gold would be 10 to 20, and then red would be greater than 20 milligrams per liter. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has specified the drinking water standard at 10 or less. So if you have a well or a city has water in excess of 10 parts per million or milligrams per liter, we would recommend that that water be treated to help reduce the amount of nitrate nitrogen in the drinking water. And we'll talk about some issues with that here next. With this graph, I just want to kind of point out some areas that are pretty hot, if you will. The dark yellow gold and then the red dots, especially along the Platte River. This would be out here close to the Kearney area, maybe west of Kearney, Lexington area, and then moving up towards Columbus. This area has had historically high nitrates in the drinking water for a number of years. I can remember when I started in Nebraska Extension in 1990, we were doing programming then already for high nitrates. So, 30, 40 years they've had to deal with high nitrate levels. Really the main issue for that is mostly farming operations down along the river valley. So close to the river, the soils there are very sandy. So when you get a rain or you irrigate water, that water flows or soaks into and flows through the soil very quickly. A sandy soil, it just kind of moves down through the profile very quickly. So sandy soils. The other issue is it's not very deep to groundwater. In some cases, it might just be a couple feet, maybe 10, 15 feet to groundwater. So it doesn't take very long for these, the water and the nitrates to be able to move down through the profile and get into our groundwater system. Nitrogen is very water soluble. So when it's placed in the soil, when water comes by, it really dissolves that nitrogen pretty easily. And then where the water goes, the nitrogen goes. The other kind of hot spot here is up in north central Nebraska. This area up here is sandy soils as well. A lot of livestock production up in this area, so a lot of manure application to fields and probably over application of nitrogen fertilizer as well. I know Extension has been involved not only in the Central Platte area here, but up around the Brazil groundwater management area as well, doing some educational program with growers to help them understand how much nitrogen do we need to apply to our crops and how can we start reducing the nitrates. Just want to point out some other areas of the state. You see some kind of dark yellow or gold spots. I used to live in Holdridge, which would be just south of the Platte River at Elm Creek or Kearney area. We lived there for about 12 years and our nitrate level in our drinking water, we had a private well, doubled in that time. When we sold our home, the nitrate levels were above the 10 parts per million or milligrams per liter. So we were required to provide a treatment system to help reduce the nitrates in the drinking water. So that's something to keep in mind. And the Holdridge area has been farmed about the same amount of time as the Platte Valley. The issue is in Holdridge area, we have good silt loam soils, so the water doesn't filtrate down through there very rapidly. It takes a while for that water to move down. And it's about 130 to 150 feet to groundwater. So it takes much longer, a lot more years for that nitrogen to move down through the profile. So, we can help producers understand how much nitrogen fertilizer to apply to their fields and be doing an excellent job. And we still may see nitrate levels continue to rise in certain areas for another 30 years because a lot of nitrogen is in transition or, on its way to the groundwater, just hasn't made it there yet. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and move to our next slide. It just kind of gives you an idea of where the nitrate hotspots are at. This might be a little disturbing photo for some people, but to me, it really brings home the story of why nitrates in the drinking water are an issue. I can't really pronounce this. Methemoglobinemia it's not really a disease, but it's a health issue. And it's called the blue baby syndrome. So basically when children are 2 years of age or less, they have a different bacteria in their stomach than what we as adults would have. That bacteria helps to break down the nitrogen that's in water, or it could be in the milk of the mother, helps to break that down, and it gets into the bloodstream. And what it does is it ties up the oxygen in the bloodstream. So the baby basically is suffocating internally. You know, it's breathing normally, probably gasping, trying to get more air, but there's oxygen in the bloodstream. It's just being held on or tied up by the nitrates that get in there. So this is a huge concern, not only for humans, but for livestock as well. And left uncorrected, this would be fatal. So something to think about. That's why we really recommend, you know, testing your drinking water. Again, if you have a private well, at least once a year to make sure that you're not getting close to that 10 parts per million. The other issue that could happen, you know, before the baby's born would be in the mother's womb. If the mother ingests water with too much nitrogen in it, same thing could happen and could cause a miscarriage. And that would happen not only in humans, but in livestock as well. So some things to be concerned of. The rest of us, adults, long-term health concerns with high nitrates, you could maybe see some cancer develop after a number of years. You also could feel nausea, you know, stomach symptoms, things like that from having too much nitrogen in the drinking water. So that's why it's a concern and we really need to watch that. So that's kind of my groundwater talk, and it's really localized. You know, you'll have areas with high nitrates where it kind of moves with the groundwater, but E. coli, any pesticides or anything like that that might show up in the drinking water from a private well is really a local issue. Maybe the well casing was installed incorrectly, or they didn't know any better when they did it, you know, 30, 40 years ago. The practices that we have now for installing wells and locating private septic systems far enough away from the well so we don't get, you know, water moving in between those two to contaminate, both from nitrates and in an E. coli standpoint. So really, except for nitrates, the groundwater quality is pretty much a localized issue. So I'm going to move into surface water now, and this program really is administered by the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. So you can see the website there. Go ahead and click on that link or type it in, Google it, and you'll be able to pull up the reports that I was able to view the last couple days. So NDEQ, now NDEE, has a 6-year rotation plan to monitor across the state. So just as an example, the orange area right in the middle, the Loop River system and the Middle Platte River system, those were monitored or sampled in 2013. So 6 years from then, 2019 would have been the next year that they would have been sampled. So once every 6 years, they do pretty intensive sampling on all the surface water. So that would be the rivers, streams, creeks, and any lakes or impoundments that would be there as well. And then Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy puts out a report every 2 years, and we're due to have one here anytime now. The last report I was able to find was 2018, came out in April of 2018. So anytime we should see another report coming out with the most recent data on surface water quality. So this is some data from 2000 to 2010, so over a 10-year period. These were the number of impairments and the different problems or impairments that they found in the water samples. So by far and away, the most of them were E. coli. Again, that's that bacteria from the digestive systems of humans and livestock. And you really see those in kind of extreme years when you get big rainstorms. You know, a year ago in the northeast and east part of Nebraska, we would have seen a lot of rainfall, a lot of streams and rivers that, you know, basically went into feedlots, calving areas where there's a lot of livestock manure. We can't really plan for those extreme events that happen once every 100 or 500 years. So we just have to kind of deal with them. So that's why we see the E. coli. I know we had a big rainstorm around Grand Island here about a week ago. They received up to 10 inches in some areas as well. Again, you can't really plan for those events in terms of collecting livestock waste. So it's pretty difficult to keep that out of our streams and rivers. Some other contaminants, atrazine was a fairly big one with 26 impairments. A lot of work has been done in the Blue River Basin, that's around that Clay Center, Aurora area over to Beatrice and south. The Blue River drains into Kansas and I believe ends up in Tuttle Creek Reservoir. That reservoir is used for drinking water for Lawrence, Kansas. So they were seeing high atrazine levels. So Kansas and Nebraska had a joint project for a number of years where we did a lot of education with the growers about using atrazine. Atrazine is a pesticide, a herbicide that kills weeds, really cheap because it's been around for a long time, also very effective. So it's hard to take atrazine out of the mix because it's been such a economical and effective tool for us. But there's things we can do with atrazine and other pesticides as well to help reduce the incidence of water moving across the field and taking those into the surface water, rivers and streams. High pH, that would just be the acidity of the water. A selenium would be a metal. Low DO would be low dissolved oxygen. So those would be in some maybe ponds or lakes that don't get a lot of wave action, not a lot of disturbance of the water. So the amount of oxygen in the water itself can get pretty low. And that's a concern really for fish and aquatic animals in the water. They breathe in the oxygen that's within the water. So if that gets low, you can have some fish kills and things like that if that gets too low. Then of course, high temperature, that's not really something we can control. That's pretty much Mother Nature. You know, if we get a really high temperature, low rainfall time period where we don't add a lot of water to the system, we can get some high temperatures, and that's critical for some of our fish species as well. Trout do not survive very well in high temperature water. So those are the things that are sampled for and kind of the incidents over that 10-year time period. We should be getting a new report out here anytime soon for the 2010 to 2020 time period. So this is the state, and like I said, each of these areas are sampled every 6 years. You see the color of dots here, and they report different categories for this integrated report. And I'll go into these categories here next, but I just want to show you some areas. A dark blue dot would be no impairments, so you know, really good surface water quality. Could be used for fishing or swimming without any concerns at all. Not a lot of those areas in the state. Most of our surface water have some type of an impairment to them, and we'll kind of go through the discussion on what those might be. So again, these categories, category 1, that was that dark blue dot. Water bodies are designated for all uses and they're met. Category 2 would be the water bodies where some of the designated uses are met, but there's insufficient data to assess the other uses. And basically the same thing for category 3. You just don't have enough data available to determine beneficial uses, all the beneficial uses, I should say. We start getting into category 4. Now these would be an impaired, but a TMDL is not needed. So a TMDL is it's an acronym, total maximum daily load, that's designated by the Environmental Protection Agency. And this would be for you know, any kind of a chemical or a pesticide in the water, amount of soil in the water, how cloudy it looks. Those would all have different TMDLs that would be acceptable. So here I need to move on my screen a little bit. Here the water body assessment indicates that the water is impaired, but all the required TMDLs have been completed. So basically we're doing the best that we can to control these things. May still be impaired, but it may not be something that we can take care of. Might be Mother Nature, you know, causing problems, or minerals or metals or something like that that's just occurring naturally in the streams. So we've got all these other categories, B, C, and D, and it really talks about the different TMDLs and how much information we need there and what the issues really are. When we get down to category 5, that's where the water body, we have one or more beneficial uses are determined to be impaired, and all of the TMDLs have not been developed. So basically, we're not meeting all the objectives. We're not doing all we can do to help reduce quality issues. in this surface water body, rivers, streams, or lakes. So those would be the 5. We did see some 5 categories. That would be the bright red, and I'll go back to that. You see quite a few along the Platte River system here. Some of the smaller streams and lakes over around Omaha, Lincoln, Omaha area, and then like south of Seward and Yorkton and those areas, quite a few. So now we're going to move into some sections of this report. And again, you can download this report and view it for yourself. I encourage you to do that. Read the sections that are more pertinent to you. I'm going to kind of focus on an area, one of the areas that's close to North Platte, just because that's what I'm the most familiar with. I know quite a few of these lakes and rivers and streams that are included in the report. But again, you can download that information for yourself. So these are the things that they're looking for when they go out and do their sampling. The ammonia, which is a form of nitrogen, nitrate, nitrogen, total nitrogen, total phosphorus. Phosphorus would be another fertilizer that's utilized quite heavily in agriculture and homeowners and golf courses as well. Phosphorus, contrary to nitrogen, is not water soluble. So when you apply phosphorus fertilizer and it gets into the soil, it really binds to clay particles in the soil. So basically you apply phosphorus, it's not going to move for you, not going to leach down into the groundwater. The issue of phosphorus is, since it is bound to soil particles, if we have an extreme flooding event and have a lot of soil erosion, phosphorus goes where the soil goes. So that's where we would get phosphorus showing up in our rivers and streams if we've had a pretty good flooding event and caused a lot of erosion on our fields and along streams as well. Total chlorides, suspended solids, again, turbidity, those would reflect, how much soil particles, clay particles are in the water. You've probably heard the Missouri River referred to as the muddy Missouri. That would have quite a bit of suspended solids in it, quite a bit of turbidity. pH, temperature, we've talked about already. Conductivity, that would be how much, again, the chlorides, the salts that are in the soil. We have some naturally occurring salty areas in the state. So the salts can get dissolved in runoff and move into the rivers and streams. Then of course, the E. coli bacteria and pesticides as well that they're monitoring for. So this is one example. Like I said, this is the Middle Platte River basin. Starts here at North Platte or just east of North Platte and goes up through pretty much to Columbus down into Butler County a little bit. So that's the Middle Platte, and this was, I believe, sampled in 2013, so 2019 should be the next sampling. So should be seeing data for this pretty well, pretty soon. So we've got these different designations here on the bottom of the screen. Primary contact recreation, so that would be it's okay for swimming. So 95 lakes there and 13 streams. Start getting into the aquatic life, cold water class A and B. We've got a few streams in this part of the state that are cold enough to support trout species. So we would have 3 of those. You get up north, and then also some down along the southern basin as well. Get to be some cold water, spring-fed streams that the temperatures would support trout populations. Aquatic life, warm water classes A and B, you see quite a few of those. Most of those would qualify for the lakes and streams in this part. See drinking water supplies, public drinking water, we've got 1 stream. Apparently they pump water out of the Platte River or one of its tributaries, and then probably treat that water and then utilize it for public drinking. Public water or water supplies for agriculture, that'd be like irrigation, so they pump out of a river or stream and then use that water to irrigate their fields. All of those lakes and streams would be acceptable in terms of quality for an ag water supply. And then we've got, looks like 1 water supply for an individual, 2 lakes and 1 stream that would utilize that water for an individual. So somebody just, lives next to the lake or the stream, they pump it out and hopefully treat it and then drink it. So those are the kinds of things that they're looking for, the different types of uses. Again, this starts on page 116. This report's, oh gosh, it's, I don't know, over 300 pages long, so a lot of information in there. look a little bit more. So when these reports come out, they try to flag things that have changed since the last time that the sampling was taken. Just as an example here, under Johnson Lake, the water body was listed as a Category 5 in 2016 report. And that aquatic life was impaired for total phosphorus and chlorophyll. So too much plant material basically growing in the lake. That could be algae or plankton or, you know, some type of aquatic plant growing in the lake. So too high. So since then, a new water quality data determined that it is also impaired for total nitrogen. So we've got too much water, too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus in the water, which again, our fertilizers leads to plant growth. That's probably why we have a lot of plant material growing as well, and a lot of chlorophyll. Yanni Park, that would be at Kearney, one of the parks there on the southwest corner of town. So this was a Category 5, so there it has some impairments. Aquatic life use was impaired by mercury. So yeah, different things that they test for, and this mercury can ends up in the fish material. So we have certain water bodies where we can't consume the fish that we catch because this mercury could accumulate in our systems and cause health problems for us as well. Just another sample report of the Middle Republican. You see here the recreation, aquatic life, different things there. The thing I wanted to point out was a fish consumption assessment's been compiled on several of these lakes. Here's the one at Fort McPherson Lake. That would be just east of North Platte, near Maxwell, I believe, is the Fort McPherson Lake. So there is a fish consumption advisory there for mercury as well. So typically on these lakes, if they're public lakes, there will be signs up that say, hey, don't eat the fish. You know, it has a mercury hazard with it. So that's really all I wanted to show in terms of the reports. Again, you can go in and go through these reports for different areas of the state, and there'll be 10, 15 pages typically of data for all the rivers, streams, and lakes within the boundaries of that basin. The other thing that I wanted to make you aware of, that webpage that I shared earlier has fish consumption advisories, and I believe these are updated pretty regularly. So you can look at different areas across the state. Mercury, selenium here on the North Platte River. Common carp is showing mercury and selenium there as well. PCBs, that's another chemical. We used to have a lot of PCBs in our electrical industry. Transformers used to contain PCBs. They no longer do, but we're left over with some of them that had PCBs, and a lightning storm, you know, might break a transformer and release that PCB into the atmosphere or into the environment, and it could end up in the river streams and then accumulate into the fish. The other thing that's on that webpage on Department of Environment and Energy that I showed gives you a weekly update on E. coli and also harmful algae blooms, the blue-green algae, if you will. So they're looking at these, you know, they got the sampling date here. They do this every week, and if E. coli starts to get too high, they'll start putting signs out, you know, hey, be careful with the water. And really the E. coli, the issues there would be is if you would drink some of that water, get it into your system, or maybe have some of it get into your ear canal. The bacteria could grow and develop and cause you some health concerns there. But you can check this out. Again, they update this every week. And this is just a small sampling. You can click on us all results, and it'll show you for the whole state where the blue-green algae is and the E. coli sampling it does, and then the results of that. With that, I'd kind of conclude my comments, I guess. If you have questions, after today, feel free to send me an email. My email is just cburr, the digit 1 at unl.edu. I'd be glad to share this link with you, show you where to get some of this information so you can really look it up on for your area. So with that, do we have any questions in the chat there? We'll kind of watch that and see what we get for questions. Alicia, any comments?
We did have a couple questions while you were presenting.
Okay.
Q&A box. So the first one was from Maya. She said, what determines the number of water quality impairments and what is the unit of measurement for the surface water?
Yeah, so it would be different for each contaminant. So like, the pH would be on a pH scale. Nitrogen was in that milligrams per liter. A lot of them would be milligrams per liter, but it really depends on how they measure each impairment. So it could be different for each one. So yeah, good question.
And then Sally said, I see that the waterways are tested for levels of individual pollutants. To what extent is the impact of combined pollutants studied or recommended? For example, X amount of phosphorus and Y amount of nitrates is allowed in the water, but are there any rules or studies that look at the health impacts of the interactions of those pollutants in the water?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure I could give you an adequate answer for that. Um, I know there could be some interactions. Obviously one of those with a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus would encourage plant growth that would contribute to the blue-green algae. So there's one interaction there I could see might be an issue. But yeah, the Environmental Protection Agency really monitors. They get these reports as well, and they comb through them. And if there's any concerns there, then they get in contact with the state of Nebraska very quickly and see what we can do to help addressing some of these issues.
And then Karen asked, what action steps can we / should we take to prevent additional contamination to mitigate contaminants currently above the MDM?
Yeah, so just looking from the response on the people that said where they were from, I would guess most of the attendees would live in town. So what you do on your lawns and in your streets as well would have an impact. The recommended nitrogen fertilization for a lawn, what's recommended by UNL is 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square foot once a month for 5 months. So you'd be putting on 5 pounds of nitrogen on a 1,000 square foot area. On a per acre basis, that's really, really high. That's over 200 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer. So if you're following the UNL recommendations, you'd be putting on pretty close to the same amount of fertilizer that we would recommend for a cornfield. So even though your lawn is a lot smaller than a cornfield, you could be contributing to nitrate leaching to the groundwater as well. The other thing is any kind of a pesticide application or fertilizer application, and then getting a heavy rain that can be flushed into our rivers and streams. And then the storm drains, what goes in the storm drain ends up in a stream before too long. So, if people dump old oil or grease or clean out their RV septic system and just dump it in the sewage or in the drain water, that goes directly to the stream. So we could be contributing as well in town to the quality of our rivers and streams as well.
Mm-hmm. Rachel said, do they charge to check your water yearly for well water?
So private systems, yeah, we have test kits in the extension offices. I believe in most extension offices across the state. They're basically furnished by the Department of Health. Let's see, the last time we had our water tested here, I believe a nitrogen test was like $10 and a E. coli test was another $15. So $25, $30 you can get a test. And again, for private wells, we would recommend once a year. And we have, for example, my home here, it's just me and my wife. Our kids are all grown up and move away, but now we have grandkids that come to visit us, and our daughters or daughter-in-laws are maybe expecting and not delivered. So even though, nitrogen may not be a huge concern for my wife and I, it sure would be for our family that comes to visit us. So be thinking about that as well. Don't think only about yourself. Think about somebody else that might come visit, a cousin or relative or friends that come visit. Wouldn't want to expose them to high nitrates either.
Yeah. And then Deborah had a couple of questions. She said, how do we remediate all the water contaminant problems? What is the plan to address the issues? And do the NRDs work on these problems?
Yeah, so the local NRDs would work in conjunction with the Department of Environment and Energy on these issues. Something like mercury, that I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm sure that's some of that's naturally occurring. Some of it could have been from, you know, the old mercury thermometers we had. If one of those would break, somebody might just flush it down the stool or something. So that could be a problem, and the mercury is going to be around for a long time. That's not something that breaks down rapidly in the environment. So that's why it's starting to show up in some of our fish species as well. So some of these things we can really address. Again, some of them are just naturally occurring in nature, you know, like the salinity issues. There's some salt flats south of Lincoln. You get out here to North Platte, we have a lot of lowland areas where there's some salt accumulated in the soils. And again, when you get a big rain, that'll move into the rivers and streams. Not a lot we can do about that, but do the best we can.
Mm-hmm. And then Jordan had a question: to what extent is the legislator involved, be it in prevention or mitigation, past, present, or what you might expect in the future?
Yeah, so I think we have a pretty good legislative set of laws right now that control, you know, of course, these TMDLs and the amount of pesticides and things in our water supplies. And then with the frequent monitoring, I think we do a pretty good job of monitoring the water quality. And then, you know, the posting at public lakes and stuff where people congregate. If there's an issue there, I can remember one time we went, my family and I went skiing at Harlan County Reservoir, and we noticed the sign said caution, you know, blue-green algae. So that's something that develops very quickly, and the state's pretty good about monitoring that and then putting up signage to let people know, hey, there's an issue here. A lot of times you'll see news releases in the paper, you know, watch out for blue-green algae in this lake. It's really increasing right now.
And then someone asked, do you have any recommendations for alternatives for using fertilizers and planting one type of grass in a yard?
Yeah, so of course the nice looking green grass that we see on our lawns is probably a bluegrass or a fescue mixture. And it looks nice, and it just takes nitrogen. Now, when we planted it, we just built a house here in North Platte 5 years ago, and we purchased a blend of seed called Sure Shot. And it's a bluegrass mix, but it has a darker green color. So we don't have to really fertilize it near as much just because it's naturally green color. We don't have to water as much. So you can start looking for different varieties of bluegrass that don't take as much water or nitrogen. The other one, some people have moved to buffalo grass. Buffalo grass is a warm season grass, so it doesn't really green up. It really starts growing about this time of the year. So, you know, our lawn's been green. I've mowed it several times already. Bluegrass would just now be getting going. And then it doesn't take a lot of water, or a lot of nitrogen, either one. And then, of course, when you get a first frost, it goes dormant for the season, where my bluegrass lawn might stay green until November, December. So a shorter growing season for the buffalo grass, which would be a warm season grass.
Jordan asked, do you feel people in general are aware of water quality issues throughout the state, or should we do more on the education and awareness side?
Yeah, and I know there's been some surveys done across the state. I don't think most people think about water quality in general terms because they haven't had an incident with it. You know, if you've had E. coli in your drinking water system in your house, and you get diarrhea type symptoms or nausea with that, I think that would make you more aware of. For the most part, our water quality is very good in Nebraska, so we probably don't think about it near as much as we should. And then we really rely on the state and then our local agencies to let us know if there is an issue.
Deborah asked, E. coli is very high. How do we reduce that?
Yeah, so E. coli, it's a bacteria, so Clorox would control that, kill that pretty quickly. Chlorine. When I lived in St. Joe, Missouri, they pumped their water out of the Missouri River system. And I can remember taking a hot shower and having chlorine burn my eyes. So that was their way to control the E. coli, was to add chlorine to the water. Another thing you can do is boil that, and that'll help kill those bacteria and keep them from infecting you. If we have a private well that has an E. coli system, and we had an issue with that several years ago, right after our well was put in, we had to chlorinate our well. And we actually have a publication through our Nebraska Extension publications that takes you step by step how to apply Clorox or chlorine to your drinking water system. And you got to pump it through the system so that chlorine gets into all the pipes and everything in your home, and then leave that set for several hours to kill the bacteria. And of course, you'd want to flush that out and get rid of that water so you weren't drinking the high chlorine content water. So yeah, that's the way you control that. And I have personal experience with that. I had to do that here in my well at North Platte.
And somebody asked, do you think it is possible to phase out water pollutants? And if so, what would that look like in Nebraska?
Yeah, so actually that area in the Central Platte Valley from, Lexington to Columbus, the parts per million used to be in the 40s, 40 parts per million or milligrams per liter. And there's been a really concerted effort, educational effort for the last 30 years. And we see those numbers coming back down. So we can help improve in some cases, the turbidity and things like that. We just need to do a better job of using conservation tillage, leaving residue on fields to help reduce soil erosion, to keep the soil on our fields and not allow that to be eroded due to a big rainstorm into our rivers and streams. So we continue to do that. Part of my job and my coworkers' job is to work with feedlot owners that would have a large number of cattle in a confinement area. So they are instructed how to collect that livestock waste, how to store it, and then apply it to levels on fields that would help reduce the chance of E. coli or nitrates being an issue on crop fields. Letting our crops utilize those nutrients instead of letting them either go down to the groundwater or end up in our surface water supplies.
Yeah. And somebody asked, what are the health effects of added fluoride in drinking water?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, when we lived in Clay Center, I believe they applied fluoride as well. I'm probably not a great person to answer that. Probably be somebody from the Department of Environment or Energy to answer that question on fluoride in drinking water. I know it has some benefits in terms of dental health, but I think at too high levels, we could start getting into some problems there.
And then Jordan said, what technologies are important in the water quality area?
Yeah, so the one is the monitoring. They have like conductivity testers you can take out and check it right away. E. coli is a little bit tougher because you really need to incubate that and grow that to see the bacteria there. We're using a ton of technology in agriculture today, just helping from plant sensing to aerial imagery, satellite imagery, planes and drones flying over our fields, looking at the reflected light off of the plant leaf, and that tells us whether that plant needs more nitrogen or not. So this technology really helps us to be more efficient with applying only the fertilizer that the plant needs. And then also in terms of irrigation management, again, there's a ton of technology available, from soil moisture sensors to this satellite aerial imagery as well, telling us if we really need to be watering or not. So irrigation is good for crop production, but if we irrigate too much and leave the soil profile full of water at the end of the year, end of the season, that's when we start getting into some nitrate issues, because the profile is full. Any rain, precipitation we get soaks into the soil. The soil can't hold it, so it just gravity keeps moving it downward towards our groundwater tables, and could take the nitrogen with it. So I'm involved with a project here in North Platte. It's called UNL TAPS, Testing Ag Performance Solutions. And we have lots and lots of technology available for the farmers to participate, get to utilize that, get comfortable with it. And then they go back home and adopt some of that technology on their farms to help them be more profitable and more efficient.
And then somebody asked, how do you convince people to care about water quality? Do you use different techniques with different types of people?
I guess I don't get a lot of questions about water quality from people just because they don't think about it, because there hasn't been an issue with that. And if there gets to be a problem or in a specific area, we just need to let people know the facts. You get too much nitrogen in the drinking water, it can start affecting health, especially of babies or women that are expecting, or livestock that are, ready to deliver, or young calves or pigs or anything like that. So really, if there's an issue, you just kind of tell them the facts. This is what it is. This is how you or your livestock could be affected, and this is why we need to address this.
Well, that looks like all the questions we have for right now. Well, thank you, Chuck, for talking about water quality with us today.
Yeah, and again, my email is just cburr, the digit 1 at unl.edu, or you can just Google Chuck Burr, Nebraska Extension, and be able to get some contact information for me. Be glad to share resources with you, share links to these web pages.